Illinois Stories is brought to you by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by the support of viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello, welcome to Illinois Stories. I'm Mark McDonald in Coatsburg in Adams County. In front of what's probably, at the time it was built in 1870, was the biggest house in Coatsburg, and it may also be the oldest house in Coatsburg. And that's not really why we're here today. We're here, it's a beautiful old home, but we're here because it was the birthplace of a very famous person, and you may not have known about that. We're going to learn a little bit more about it with Don here. Don, it's interesting, when you and your wife Sharon bought the house in 1979, you probably didn't know that it was the home of somebody famous either, did you?
Not at all. Not at all.
William S. Gray II, and we're going to learn a lot more about him as we go through the program, was the author of the Dick and Jane reading books, the primary reading books. And he's known the world over as being one of the leading experts in literacy. And he was born right in this very house.
We sure didn't know that.
No. When you learned it, what'd you think?
Well, we were very surprised, to say the least. I mean, the fact that we're here and have been here since June of '79, it became a love affair for us, this 4 acres. And but we knew that of the 4 people that Senator Gray, the first, was the second owner or whatever, way back then. But it was just an old established family in Coatsburg. We knew that there were several Grays. But this man, his dad, was a state senator at that time. And but it was quite a house back then.
Oh, well, it's still quite a house. You're going to show us, your wife's going to show us through the inside of it. And we have some historians here who have studied William S. Gray Jr., we're going to learn a lot more about him from them. They're from Quincy.
Yes.
But as you look at this house now, it's just absolutely gorgeous. But it took years and years for you and Sharon to get it this way, didn't it?
Well, it had not been lived in for almost 10 years when we bought it in June of '79, and it was just about the place. It still looked, all right from the outside and whatever, but inside, of course, it needed all kinds of things. And we began to just pick away at it, room at a time inside, and I began to do what I could do outside or whatever, and I painted it by hand for a lot of years.
You painted it by hand?
One side a year, that's all I could get in.
Well, you were a mailman at the time.
I was a real mail carrier,
yes, a mail carrier,
so
you were busy.
Yes.
Can we walk that way? Get a
sure,
little closer
you bet.
As we look at the front, now we see the front door is where the original front door was.
Yes.
But the house didn't look like this when it was built, did it?
No, the wing on the left there was added on. The main house was built in 1870, and that wing was put on, we think, very close to the turn of the century. And
it was just a porch to begin with.
This was the old front porch, and the banister up above went around then. That was blown off or weathered off, one of the two, in earlier years. And the Lummis family, who were the third owners that made it into a funeral home, they wanted they wanted more space here on this left side. And what you see now with the there's 2 sets of gutters there, and the old original roof was the front porch, basically. So they added on here to the left, and we made that into our dining room, and it's just been wonderful. But it's changed basically the look of the house, because back then this was not there, and it was the front porch went on around like the banister does, and there was a door right above that one window, which is a fake, went into the sitting room, and then there was a window here below this window, far window to the left, and that was a little galley kitchen inside.
And we're going to get a chance to see that too.
Yes.
We're going to get in fact, Sharon's going to give us a tour of the ground floor anyway, and we'll learn more about this beautiful Victorian house, which you painted and painted and painted. I know that look on your faces. I'm glad I don't do that anymore.
I couldn't do it anymore. I'm to the place where my family have dictated that, Dad, you've got to stay off those ladders. You're an old man, and whatever.
Let's go inside. It's cold.
I still fudge a little bit.
Okay. But come on, let's go.
All right. Fine.
Sharon, we're going to show some pictures about what this house looked like in 1979 and shortly thereafter, after you all bought it.
Okay.
But first, we're going to take a tour through to see what it looks like. This is in 1870, when this house was built, it was it was the biggest house in Coatsburg.
Yeah, I think it still is.
And I imagine it's one of the oldest.
I imagine. I don't know about the little houses that are here, but I know the one south of us was after this one by several years. I think it was 1929 or something it was built.
This was quite a project. This house would have been quite a project for Coatsburg. Yeah.
It had to be.
Yeah. You all replaced the glass that we're looking at here, but not the woodwork. The woodwork's all original.
All
isn't it?
original,
Yeah,
all
it's
original.
beautiful.
We actually didn't replace the glass. We just had a panel made to put over the original glass.
Oh, I see.
Just to make it prettier.
Yeah, well, it is. It's gorgeous,
So,
and
yeah.
it looks real old timey.
So, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And then this would have been, and you said there were 2 weddings in this house at one
Yeah.
time. But this would have been, after you entered, you would either have been shown, if you were a guest, into the parlor where we're going to go next, or you would have gone probably down this hall to do your business, to go into the kitchen or wherever else you wanted to go. But let's go to the parlor first.
Okay.
And you still have it just like it would have been a formal parlor. I mean, it looks that way
the
to
way
me
I
anyway.
imagined it, it's kind of that look, that's what we like.
It's got very, very high ceilings, and we mentioned the woodwork earlier. The wood actually came from the trees very near here.
Right, up north on Bear Creek.
Is that right?
Mr. Grigsby that built the house had property up there, and he had the wood all sawed for this.
Yeah,
so.
and as we can see behind you can see how gorgeous it is, and it's kind of unusual. I don't see a lot of wood in that sort of formation of wood.
Right. That's one of the things that sold us the house was the woodwork, because we
Yeah.
loved that.
And you never had to do anything to it. Hadn't been painted. There weren't layers of paint on
Nope,
it or anything like
I've
that.
never refinished it or anything. It's just the way it was.
It's beautiful. Here's another interesting thing, and it taught me a history lesson. I'm looking at this fireplace over here, and I'm thinking, this house is odd because in 1870, a lot of houses built around that time there was a fireplace in every room, but there
Right.
were no fireplaces in this
Right.
house.
None.
You put this in.
We had this put in, and it's not really a working fireplace. We put a gas log in, but we weren't happy with that, so
Yeah.
we just got a little electric.
Yeah. So how do you suppose they heated the house?
Well, it looked like coal probably from the big impression down in that
They
basement.
had a
a
boiler.
big boiler.
Okay,
Yeah,
so they
like-
must have just started using boilers about that time, 1870.
I guess,
Because the
yeah.
houses I tour, usually they were built in the 1860s, they got a lot of
They
fireplaces.
got a lot of
Yeah,
fireplaces.
yeah.
And I always wanted a fireplace, so our
There
son-in-law
you
at
go.
the time
Okay,
put
now
that
you got
in.
one.
And this was kind of fun, this mantle. I was at a ladies' meeting one day down at our church, and I said, I want to find a mantle that we can put over this fireplace.
Mm-hmm.
And this lady said, well, we've got one in our barn loft that, So we went to look at it, and it didn't look like this. It was all painted and crackled and stuff.
But you could tell the features of it.
I could tell.
Yeah,
And so we went and asked her husband, and he wanted a whole $20 for it.
And it really is old, isn't it?
It is old.
You and Don don't much anymore, but you combed antique stores all over the Midwest, didn't
Yes,
you? And
lots
it
and
shows.
lots
It shows when you look through here.
Good.
And you also were an upholsterer, right?
Yes,
So when
yes.
we look over at this piece over here, this is an antique that you and Don found that was, what kind of condition was it in?
It was in pretty bad condition. The horsehair was falling out, and somewhere I have pictures, but I don't know where they're at.
Yeah.
And so I just upholstered that. And it was wobbly. It's still a little wobbly, but
Well, you got it on a carpet, so
That's right,
But
right.
you did the upholstery on it, and it's a beautiful piece.
Thank
You
you.
also did the upholstery on these 2 chairs over
Right.
here, and you found these in Springfield, huh?
found those in Springfield.
Yeah?
Yep. In fact, a friend of mine had seen them, and she said, "You better go over there and take a look at those." And we came home with them then. So
And you upholstered those as well.
upholstered those.
It's a beautiful color
And
you
the
chose.
clock up there we got up at Sullivan Auctions several years ago. And it's not running right now, but it does run.
Well, I'll put you in touch with a clock expert.
All
and we can get
right.
that thing running. And then just over here, this organ, this old organ, that has a story too, and a personal story, doesn't
Yes. The gentleman whose picture is on there, Phil Young from Southern Illinois, we would visit him once in a while, and I loved the organ. So when he sold the place and had an auction, we went down there and I bid till I got it. And then we bought that Reed organ book came with it, but we've got a thing of old sheet music upstairs that I bought too. So we treasure that.
Now, we're going to talk a lot more about William S. Gray as we go through this program.
Okay.
But it's interesting because you still have some pictures here that stayed, I guess they stayed with the house of the William S. Gray family at this house through the years when they were raising their family here. Mm-hmm. And help me out here with what, now obviously we're seeing the exterior of your house,
Right.
but William S. Gray Sr. was raising his family here. It was a large family. They took many pictures, and you're lucky to have one.
Yeah, these are all actually copies of the originals, and I have them somewhere. But this was the Mr. and Mrs. William S. Gray the first. This was the author that we're going to talk about, William S.
And he was born here.
And he was born here. He was born in this house. This is his son, William S. Gray, that now, at the time I did this, he was 84, but he lives in Chicago, he and his wife.
Is he
do.
still alive?
He's still alive.
Now, this man popped in on you, didn't he?
Yes, yes. We came home from church one day, and here he and his wife were. And
Isn't that? And he said, you know, my dad grew up in this house. Can I come in and take a look around? Is that what he did?
Pretty much. And we invited him for dinner, and we've been friends ever since.
Well, it's interesting because here, let me put this down because I want to bring your attention to something else as well. He gave you several books. He wanted them to stay with the house.
Right.
And so he brings you these remarkable old. Maybe you can take that bottom one for me.
They're falling apart. They're so
I'm
old.
sorry about that. I'm trying to be as careful
No,
as I can.
it's not your
But
fault.
these old books, and he didn't even know who these people were, but he
Nope.
thought they should stay with the house.
Yep. And his children weren't interested because they didn't know who they were. So he said, if I send you these books, would you like them? And I thought, oh, yes, I'd love them.
Yeah, and now it'd be nice if these people were named and we had some
Yes.
idea who they. But here's another example. These are just about as old as photographs get. Some of them.
I think so. They are old. They are very old.
Beautiful old books.
It's fun to look through them. And
Look at that.
so, then they're leather
Yeah.
bound. And
Yeah.
they're,
Oh, that's terrific. So you became friends, and you're still friends with William S. Gray the third.
The third.
Who's the son of the famous author, who
Right.
we're going to learn more about during
Right.
this program. Okay, let's keep going.
Let's go. Okay.
After you.
Now this is more modern. Antiques are nice, but they're not comfortable a lot
Yeah,
of times.
this is your living room.
This is our
Yeah,
living room. This
yeah.
is where we spend our evenings.
But as you can see, again, when they built this house, they had every intention of making it as solid and grand as they could
Yes,
afford. And
yes,
they did a really
yes.
nice job, particularly with the woodwork.
The
It's
woodwork
just
is fantastic in here. Yeah. So we've enjoyed that part of it a lot.
We haven't mentioned this yet, but before you bought this house, it was at one time a funeral home.
It was a funeral home from
so-
1940 till about 1961 or 2.
This was probably the room where the casket
The
lay.
casket was right over here
Okay,
on
against
this
this wall.
wall, and there was a large doorway there. And there was a hole in the ceiling with just a grating on it.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the Lummis boys told me they used to lay up there and look, because you could look right down into the casket.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd lay up there and watch people go by.
Oh boy, that's a boys' entertainment, huh? Yeah,
that's
let's
typical?
go view a funeral, have a good time.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, what you did here was you turned this into a full bath.
A full bath, yes.
Neat.
Yes. It's a full bath. Mm-hmm.
And this would have been, I don't know, was a porch of some kind?
Well,
or
no,
what?
it was a small bedroom, but when the Lummis family had it as a funeral home, the way I get it, family members came in here and would sit while people were going through the line.
I see.
And they would
Okay,
sit
so
in
they
here.
had their own private space.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
all
And
right.
I originally, I don't know, I don't know if it was a bedroom or not, but it was along
You took an old set of drawers and you cut a hole in it for your vanity. I like
Right,
that. That's kind of
right.
cool. Back over there, we won't go over there, but there's a full shower where you can walk in over there over your shoulder.
Right.
And there you've got your
Got
full
it. We got
bath
the full bath.
on the ground floor.
Excuse me.
Now, when you moved here, this, by the way, this is not part of the original house. This was a wing that was built on
It was
later,
built on,
after
yes, it was
1870.
built on.
But when you moved here, this was like another sitting room for the guests of the mortuary, I
Well,
guess.
yeah, basically they kept this door shut.
Mm-hmm.
And this was like the living quarters for the lady that lived here at that time, Mrs. Grace Lummis. And the other room was the kitchen. This was just her living room. She'd sit here and
Okay.
You know, because the rest of the house was just shut off until there was a visitation.
The kitchen, what was the kitchen was too small for you.
Too small for me.
So what you decided to do, you and Don decided to move the kitchen into here,
Right.
into this space.
Right.
And it's perfect.
Yeah,
Because you got
it's-
a need-in kitchen.
Right.
Yeah.
And when all our family's here every Sunday, we need both rooms, both
Sure.
tables, because it's. Then I say, I wish my kitchen was bigger.
Yeah. And then you can call through to each other, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, so now you got the big kitchen,
Right.
and this is also part of the add-on, and this
Right.
is now your dining room.
Right.
Okay.
This is now our dining room and our computer, our desk, his desk, and all that kind of stuff.
Stuff that
was in
everybody
here.
needs.
Yes,
Yeah.
right. That's right. So we kind of wanted to put the kitchen in here, but this had been a porch. And underneath here was a solid slab of concrete. The plumbing wasn't going to work well.
Oh, sure. Sure, you
So
couldn't.
I really would like to have had the kitchen with all the windows and stuff, but
Yeah.
with the plumbing. And then this is just a crawl space behind us here in the
Mm-hmm,
basement. So it just wouldn't have worked well.
I want to bring our camera over here so we can look down here. When you were talking about the original kitchen and how you were saying it's not big enough for me, and I can see what you were struggling with there through several years before you moved the kitchen. It's
I'd
just
have the stove, you know, the oven opened up and the kids would be trying to get behind me. And I'm like, this has got to
yeah.
go.
And now you've got your laundry room, you've got extra refrigerator and freezer space, you've got an extra sink if you want to,
That
and
sink
what
was
you've been able to do. Oh, is it really?
That's original.
What
Yeah.
you're able to do then too is now you've got a sort of a breezeway out there, or like a mud room
It's-
between there and the garage.
And the garage, right. There was a summer kitchen where our garage is now, and we tore that down because we wanted a garage. And it just served as a junk place, you know. But that sink and those cabinets above it are all original, and the door and the transom and everything is all original. So,
This gives us a chance to look at some of the challenges that you had when you were.
yeah, this was the one of
Starting.
the upstairs bedrooms.
Okay, walk us through this if you would. Let's
Okay.
point at.
Here, Don's tearing down a closet that was in a corner. It was bad. And that's another shot of him tearing it down. This was in the west wall of that room, and it was just full of cracks. I don't know if you
Are
can
you
see.
trying to fill cracks there?
I
And then you
was
end up
trying
taking all
to-
the plaster just off.
And
huh?
then I got and there was another closet, which we have a closet there, but we got real doors and stuff.
Yeah. Oh
And
man. You've
so
had
I
your-
ended up tearing all the plaster off and down to the last.
man,
and
that's hard work.
it was hard work. Don had the hardest though. He had to carry the plaster down in buckets.
Yeah. There's no other way to
yeah,
get rid of that
right.
stuff, and it's heavy.
And then we had friends and family come, and they put plastic up and put sheetrock up, and now we got a nice wall. And they put a new ceiling up because there was a huge crack where the house had settled.
Yeah. More of the same here. Are these friends
More of
and
the
family?
same, more of
Yeah.
the family, more of the same family and friends.
What would we do without people that know what they're doing,
Oh,
are willing to
my.
help us out, huh?
Yeah, no kidding. And then this is a picture of what we did, and it's showing it afterwards. And so on the other side, there's
Yeah. Boy, you really did
takes
a
a
lot. I'll tell you, old houses are
there's another picture of the.
Old houses are wonderful, but man, they're a lot of work, aren't they?
They
You
are.
probably still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, it just never ends. But we just keep, there's always something. Like this ceiling was a flat roof, and it collapsed in a few years
Did it
ago.
really?
It collapsed. Had a great big hole there, and we finally, we think, got the leak stopped. So we had them come and fix our ceiling again. So we're happy about that, because that was an eyesore. But it is always something with a big old house.
Paul Moody, I think it's kind of ironic and interesting that a teacher like yourself, you taught for 34 years in this area.
Right here
And this
in
is
Unit 3.
what is this district called?
Unit 3 School District.
Unit 3, and it encompasses Coatsburg, right?
Yes, it's Camp Point, Coatsburg, Clayton, and Golden.
One of the fathers of literacy was born in this very house in Coatsburg, and a teacher like yourself wasn't aware of it. He's a real unsung hero, isn't he?
That's correct. And, after teaching the 34 years, we found out that William S. Gray was born here in Coatsburg, and we thought, this is extreme, this is exciting. So at that point, upon retiring, in 2003, we found out that, and we did research about William Gray.
Yeah. Let's just refresh ourselves on what the Dick and Jane series of books looked like. A lot of people watching this program are going to remember in their primary years reading Dick and Jane and about the cat and all the characters, you know, work Dick, work, see Sally, work, all these cute little characters and the way that he would repeat certain words, see Dick, work. So you got in the habit of knowing what these words look like.
Right. The repetition of words that William Gray had instilled was part of his teaching style.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the ways you became familiar with him is you started preserving one-room schoolhouses. You were very interested in this.
Yes.
And you learned in that process that his first job was in a one-room schoolhouse not too far from here.
That's right. It was about 3 miles south and east of Coatsburg,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, it was a Hazelwood school. It was on the farm of our past sheriff, Bob Null,
Uh-huh.
and we went out to see what was left in the pony shed. And the wood shed was the only thing that was left that had been moved over to his house.
Is that right? Okay,
Yes.
and so you have these replicas made, and these are pretty close, aren't they?
Yes, the replica of the pony shed and the wood shed is fairly close. The school with the belfry, and you know, that was close. But there's a lot of changes that can be made that, you know, between one school and another.
And he starts his career here, just 3 miles from Coatsburg, in a one-room schoolhouse.
Yes.
And then he works his way up to become a scholar. He had several doctoral degrees, and this wonderful author of maybe some of the most important books ever written.
That's right. And you know, we found out that a parent of a students I had the registers for the Hazelwood School.
And that's what you have your hand on right now.
That's what I have.
These are the register, and this was when he was teaching there in,
Yes.
in 1904. I'll be doggone.
1904, and then the William S. Gray was a teacher.
there
He
you
had
see his name. Yeah, he signed
29 students in first grade through 7th grade. And a lot of these names are family names from right here in this area.
You know, your wife, it's Jane, isn't it? Your wife's
Yes.
Jane, yeah. How can you forget see Dick and Jane? But your wife has become quite a William S. Gray scholar as
Yes.
well. She's followed his life and done a lot of biographical work. And in fact, the two of you take big exhibits of his work and his life around to various places, don't
Yes,
you?
we do.
Yeah. I'm going to interview her next.
Okay, very good.
Okay. Jane Moody, you also were a teacher for more than 30 years, right?
Yes, I taught 34 years in the Quincy public school system.
Yeah, and you used these very materials that you now have become your study of William S. Gray.
Yes, the first year I taught in 1966. This big book was in my first grade classroom.
Oh, does that bring back memories? Now, I don't remember a big one like this. I haven't seen these teaching materials, but isn't it interesting? So you would hold this for the kids, and with a pointer, then you would point out which words you wanted them to follow along with, huh?
Yes, the children would all be seated in front of the large book, and then with a wooden pointer, I would point, giving them the idea of reading from left to right, and then down to the next row. And it was nice because I'd have the attention of all the children because they'd be grouped close to the book. When I started teaching in 1966, big books became very popular, and we didn't realize they already had big books because the copyright is 1951 on this one.
Is that right? 1951. Boy, I do remember, and I don't remember this big book, but I remember these books all right. They're really a very interesting approach. Now, his approach was very different than some people were teaching reading at the time.
Yes.
We mentioned the fact that he was a one-room schoolhouse teacher, and these were some of the materials he had to work with there, and you can see it's much more advanced and probably tougher for the little bitty kids.
Oh, yes. The McGuffey readers were the very first leveled readers that were used in schools, and they were used in the majority of the one-room schools in the early years. There were very few pictures. If they were pictures, a lot of times just black and white. And as it says here, they had a lot of moral lessons in the books. Then from McGuffey, it progressed to the Elson readers. This is one Elson reader. And then after that, William S. Gray
He partnered
combined
with
with
Elson.
Elson.
Huh? Okay, and so they were producing, the two of them were producing these books, and you can see they started to get look a lot more like his Dick and Jane books, didn't they?
Yes, and he wanted to have more pictures and a lot of repetition to make the stories interesting for the new beginning reader, so they would really love
And
reading.
Elson was still involved. Look, he's still involved in the very first Dick and Jane books, isn't he?
Yes, and in the very first Dick and Jane books, this pre-primer was copyright 1936, and the family varied a little bit in the sense Sally wasn't named yet. They just referred to her as Baby, and the cat Puff was just called Little Mew, and Spot wasn't yet a Cocker Spaniel. He was the Terrier mix.
Little Mew, I love that. But then, of course, we see that they do come to what we know as the Dick and Jane books. And then this is when William S. Gray is working by himself. It was same publisher, the same Chicago publisher.
Yes,
right?
Scott
through the whole-
Forsman
through that whole
was
period.
the publisher.
And look, he had here we have a really good picture of him here. This was as an older man. He died in the 1960s, I think, didn't he?
Yes, and the Scott Forsman workbooks had that recognition of him in the book.
And this Life magazine, this is really gives you a good idea how famous he was, because they mention his career in talking about the Illinois one-room schoolhouses, and a child here in this cover picture using one of his books. He was very, very well known. In fact, he was kind of a father of literacy, wasn't he?
Oh yes, he was known all over the world. Even though he just started teaching the first year, 1904, 1905, in a one-room school, and then he came to another little town nearby, Fowler, and he was the principal and taught grades 5 through 8 in a two-room school for several years. And from there, he knew that reading was an area that needed to be stronger and approached a little differently. And he received several degrees. His last few were doctorates at University of Chicago.
Yeah, brilliant man.
Yes,
Brilliant
and he
man.
taught there from 1912 until he died in 1960.
Thank you. Well, it's no secret anymore that Coatsburg is the birthplace of Dr. William S. Gray. Interesting story behind these signs. When the Berrymans told the town board about this, they contacted IDOT. IDOT had the signs made up. The Berrymans went over to Springfield to pick up the signs, brought them back here where the IDOT officials put up the signs. With another Illinois story in Coatsburg, I'm Mark McDonald. Thanks for watching.
Illinois Stories is brought to you by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by the support of viewers like you. Thank you. For a DVD copy of the program you've just seen, send $19.95 to Network Knowledge, P.O. Box 6248, Springfield, Illinois 62708. Be sure to include the program name, subject, and when the program aired. You can also order with your credit card by calling 800-232-3605.